Finally parted ways, Diane felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Hope. Not hope that they would get back together, but hope that Eric would find happiness and that he would treat his next relationship with the respect and care it deserved. But something strange happened over the next few months. Eric didn't start dating someone new. Instead, he continued to work on himself, to build a life that was full and meaningful without depending on a romantic relationship to define his worth. He started coaching Little League Baseball, something he had always wanted to do but had never made time for. He repaired his relationship with his parents, having difficult conversations about boundaries and expectations. He even reached out to Diane's parents to apologize for the way their marriage had ended. And slowly, carefully, Eric and Diane began to rebuild a friendship. It started with occasional text messages, just checking in on each other, or sharing something funny that had happened during the day. Then it progressed to coffee dates, then to longer conversations about their lives and their dreams and their fears. Diane was careful to guard her heart during this process. She had worked too hard to build a life of independence and self-respect to throw it away on the possibility that Eric might have changed. But as the months passed, she began to see that his transformation was real and lasting. He listened when she spoke, he respected her boundaries, he supported her goals and dreams without trying to control or diminish them. The moment when everything changed came on a quiet Sunday afternoon in the park. They were walking together, talking about a book they had both read, when Eric stopped suddenly and turned to face her. "Diane," he said, his voice serious but gentle, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know that I'm not expecting anything from you when I say this. I'm not trying to pressure you or manipulate you or make you feel guilty." Diane felt her heart start to race, but she nodded for him to continue. "I know that I lost the right to be with you when I treated you so badly during our marriage," Eric said. "I know that I hurt you in ways that can never be completely undone, and I understand if you can never forgive me for that. But I want you to know that I love you, not the way I loved you before, but in a way that's deeper and more real. I love who you are, not who I want you to be. I love your strength and your independence, and your refusal to settle for less than you deserve." Diane looked at him standing there, this man who had broken her heart and then spent 2 years putting himself back together, and she realized that she loved him too. Not the old Eric, the one who had been selfish and emotionally unavailable, but the man he had become through hard work and genuine change. "I love you too," she said quietly. "But I need you to understand that if we do this, if we try again, it has to be different. I'm not the same woman who was willing to make herself smaller to fit into your life. I have my own dreams and goals and boundaries, and I won't give them up for anyone, not even you." "I wouldn't want you to," Eric said, and she could see that he meant it. "I fell in love with you because you were strong and independent and amazing. I was just too immature to appreciate those qualities back then. They didn't rush into anything. They took it slow, dating like they were getting to know each other for the first time. They went to movies and restaurants and museums. They talked about their hopes and fears and dreams. They learned how to be partners instead of just two people who happened to be married to each other. 6 months later, Eric proposed again. But this time, it wasn't about desperation or fear of losing her. It was about choice, about two people who had done the work to become the best versions of themselves and who wanted to build a life together based on mutual respect and genuine love. The second wedding was different from the first. It was smaller, more intimate, attended only by the people who had supported them through their individual journeys of growth. When Diane walked down the aisle this time, she wasn't the young woman who had believed that marriage would complete her. She was a woman who was already complete on her own, choosing to share her life with someone who valued and respected her completeness. Their second marriage wasn't perfect, but it was real in a way their first marriage had never been. They fought sometimes, but they fought fair, with respect for each other's feelings and perspectives. They supported each other's dreams without trying to control or diminish them. They built a partnership based on equality and mutual respect, not on outdated ideas about gender roles and expectations. And when people asked them how they had made it work the second time around, Diane would always say the same thing. "We had to learn to love ourselves before we could love each other properly. You can't give someone something you don't have, and we didn't have the emotional maturity or self-respect to build a healthy relationship the first time around." The love Diane had never received in her first marriage wasn't really love at all. It was need, it was convenience, It was the desperate attempt of two broken people to complete each other instead of healing themselves. But the love she found in her second marriage to Eric was something entirely different. It was the love of two whole people who chose each other not because they needed each other, but because they wanted to share their lives with someone who saw them clearly and valued them completely. And that, Diane learned, was the only kind of love worth having. Hit that subscribe button if this story made you think differently about love and relationships. What if the person you married wasn't the person you thought you knew? What if everything you believed about love turned out to be a lie? This is the story of Diane, a woman who learned the hardest way possible that sometimes the love we give isn't the love we receive. Her journey through heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimately self-discovery will change how you think about relationships forever. Diane met Eric on a rainy Tuesday morning at a coffee shop downtown. She was rushing to work. He was sitting alone reading a newspaper, and when their eyes met across the crowded room, something clicked. Eric had this way of looking at her that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. His smile was warm, his laugh was genuine, and when he asked for her number, Diane felt like she was living in a movie. Their courtship was everything Diane had dreamed of. Eric would send her flowers at work for no reason at all. He would call her just to hear her voice during his lunch breaks. On weekends, they would walk through the park for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Eric seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, her dreams, her fears. He would listen when she talked about her job as a kindergarten teacher, nodding and asking questions that showed he cared about her world. After 8 months of dating, Eric proposed during a sunset dinner at their favorite restaurant. The ring was simple but beautiful, and when he got down on one knee, Diane could barely contain her tears of joy. She said yes without hesitation, believing with every fiber of her being that this was the beginning of her happily ever after. The wedding was small but perfect. Diane's family loved Eric, and his family seemed to welcome her with open arms. As she walked down the aisle in her grandmother's wedding dress, looking into Eric's eyes, Diane felt like the luckiest woman alive. The vows they exchanged were heartfelt and personal. Eric promised to love her through all of life's ups and downs, to be her partner in every sense of the word, and to always put their relationship first. But something strange happened right after the honeymoon. It was subtle at first, so subtle that Diane almost missed it. Eric started working later hours. He would come home exhausted, barely speaking during dinner. When Diane would try to share stories about her day, Eric would nod absently while scrolling through his phone. The man who once hung on her every word now seemed distracted, distant, like his mind was always somewhere else. Diane told herself it was just the stress of a new job. Eric had recently been promoted to a senior position at his marketing firm, and the pressure was intense. She tried to be understanding, to give him space to adjust. She would cook his favorite meals, run baths for him when he came home stressed, and always greet him with a smile no matter how tired she was from dealing with 25 kindergartners all day. But the distance grew wider. Eric stopped asking about her day. He stopped complimenting her appearance. The spontaneous kisses and hugs became rare, then non-existent. Their conversations became purely functional, bills to pay, groceries to buy, schedules to coordinate. The emotional intimacy that had defined their relationship was slowly bleeding away, and Diane couldn't understand why. She tried talking to Eric about it. One evening, after he had spent the entire dinner staring at his laptop screen, Diane gently closed the computer and asked if they could talk. Eric looked annoyed at the interruption, but he agreed to listen. Diane carefully explained that she felt like they were drifting apart, that she missed the connection they used to have. She asked if there was anything wrong, anything she could do to help. Eric's response was cold and dismissive. He said she was being needy, that marriage was different from dating, that she needed to grow up and understand that real life wasn't like the movies. He said he worked hard all day to provide for them, and the last thing he needed was to come home to complaints and drama. Diane felt like she had been slapped. This wasn't the man she had married. This wasn't the man who had promised to be her partner through everything. The months that followed were a slow descent into loneliness. Diane found herself walking on eggshells around Eric, afraid to express her needs or feelings because they were always dismissed as unreasonable. She started questioning herself, wondering if she really was being too needy, too demanding. Maybe this was just what marriage was supposed to be like. Maybe she had unrealistic expectations. Eric's behavior became increasingly erratic. Some days, he would be the charming man she had fallen in love with, bringing her flowers, suggesting they go out to dinner, laughing at her jokes. Other days he would be cold, irritable, and completely shut off from her emotionally. Diane never knew which version of Eric would walk through the door each evening, and the unpredictability was exhausting. The turning point came on a Thursday night in October. Diane had spent the day planning a special dinner for their one-year wedding anniversary. She had taken the afternoon off work, gone grocery shopping for all of Eric's favorite foods, and spent hours preparing an elaborate meal. She lit candles, set the table with their wedding china, and even put on the dress she had worn on their first date. When Eric walked through the door that evening, he barely glanced at the romantic setup. He grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and headed straight for the couch, turning on the television without saying a word. Diane stood in the kitchen, watching her husband completely ignore the effort she had put into celebrating their anniversary, and something inside her broke. She walked over to the couch and stood in front of the television. Eric looked up at her with irritation, as if she was blocking his view of something important. "It's our anniversary," Diane said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Eric glanced around the room, seeming to notice the candles and fancy tables setting for the first time. "Oh," he said flatly, "I forgot." Not, "I'm sorry I forgot," or "let me make it up to you." Just, "I forgot," like he had missed a dentist appointment. That night, Diane lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Eric slept peacefully beside her. She thought about the woman she used to be before marriage, the woman who had dreams and goals and a sense of her own worth. Somewhere along the way, she had lost herself trying to save a relationship that was already dead. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the chest. The next morning, Diane woke up with a strange sense of clarity. She had spent so much time trying to figure out what was wrong with Eric, what was wrong with their marriage, that she had forgotten to ask what was wrong with her for accepting it. She looked at Eric sleeping beside her, his face peaceful and unburdened, and realized that he wasn't losing sleep over their relationship problems because he didn't see them as problems. This was exactly the kind of marriage he wanted. Over the following weeks, Diane started paying closer attention to Eric's behavior. She noticed how he would light up when his phone buzzed with certain messages, how he would step outside to take certain calls, how he would work late on nights when she knew his office was closed. The signs had been there all along, but she had been too busy trying to save their marriage to see them. The discovery came by accident. Diane was doing laundry when she found a receipt in Eric's pants pocket from a restaurant across town. The date was from the previous Tuesday, when Eric had told her he was working late on a big presentation. The receipt was for 2 meals, 2 glasses of wine, and a dessert they had shared. Diane stared at the piece of paper for a long time, her hands shaking slightly. She could have confronted Eric immediately. She could have screamed and cried and demanded an explanation. Instead, she sat down at her kitchen table and made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out exactly what kind of man she had married, and then she was going to decide what kind of woman she wanted to be. The investigation didn't take long. Eric wasn't particularly careful about covering his tracks, probably because he assumed Diane would never look. His phone was full of text messages from a woman named Sarah, messages that made it clear they had been seeing each other for months. The messages were intimate, romantic, everything that Eric's communication with Diane was not. Sarah worked at Eric's company, and from what Diane could piece together, their relationship had started shortly after Eric's promotion. But the messages revealed something even more devastating than the affair itself. Eric was telling Sarah all the things about Diane that he had never said to her face. He complained about how boring she was, how she didn't understand his ambitions, how she was holding him back from reaching his full potential. He told Sarah that marrying Diane had been a mistake, that he had settled for someone safe instead of someone who truly inspired him. Reading those messages, Diane felt like she was seeing her marriage from the outside for the first time. She wasn't Eric's partner or his equal. She was his safety net, his backup plan, the person who would always be there to cook his meals and wash his clothes and ask no questions about where he spent his evenings. She was convenient, not loved. The strangest part was how calm Diane felt as she read through months of betrayal. She had expected to feel angry, devastated, heartbroken. Instead, she felt relieved. Finally, she understood why nothing she did was ever good enough for Eric. It wasn't because she was failing as a wife. It was because Eric had never wanted a wife in the first place. He had wanted a mother, a caretaker, someone who would manage his life while he pursued his real interests elsewhere. That evening, when Eric came home from another late meeting, Diane was waiting for him at the kitchen table. She had printed out some of the most damning text messages and spread them across the surface like a hand of cards. Eric walked into the kitchen, saw the papers, and his face went completely white. "Diane, I can explain," he started, but she held up her hand to stop him. "I don't want you to explain," she said, her voice steady and calm. "I want you to pack a bag and leave. Tonight." Eric tried to argue, tried to minimize what he had done, tried to turn the blame back on her. He said the affair was her fault for being distant and unsupportive. He said if she had been a better wife, he wouldn't have needed to find affection elsewhere. He said she was overreacting, that all marriages went through rough patches, that they could work through this if she would just be reasonable. But Diane wasn't the same woman who had walked on eggshells around his moods for the past year. She had spent the afternoon reading about divorce lawyers and looking at apartments she could afford on her teacher's salary. She had called her best friend and asked if she could stay there for a few days while she figured things out. She had already started the process of untangling her life from Eric's.